this video, I will talk to you about designing aggregates using EF Core. Aggregates are a design element borrowed from domain-driven design. I use them intensively in many projects I work on. This is one controller action which updates some entity. It is not using aggregates yet. I plan to show you how the use of aggregates will simplify my code and also make it safer. And so this action is updating some company entities. It starts from the DB set, includes country of incorporation, that is another table, then includes addresses of the company. For each address also includes the country of that address. We need all these to update the company because an update might fail because of some validation constraint. Only when all the checks pass can we save the modified company object back into the database. That includes changes to any objects inside of it. That's very important. But how do we improve this code? To improve this code, we need to understand how these types relate to each other. There is the company and there is the address. Those are the two entities in the database, but for one company there could be 0 or more addresses, and address cannot exist without a company, plus one address only belongs to one company. It is not shared among the companies. Every company has one country object, but different companies can share the same country object. And also each address has one country. You can imagine adding a dozen more entities to this picture, and the relationships between entities would become very difficult to follow. That is where domain-driven design has brought some order by introducing aggregates as the groups of entities and values which work together. For example, the country. The country is one obvious aggregate, though not the best example for it because it works alone. A much better example is the company with addresses. But observe this, the company aggregate does not include the country. It is a completely different thing. It references the country but does not control it. That is where another important element of this design comes. Every aggregate has a root entity, a single root entity. So the root of the company aggregate is the company, obviously, and the country is its own root. It is not allowed to reference anything inside the aggregate. All you can do is to reference the aggregate root. These are the principles of the aggregate design, and they all lead to one single important point. An aggregate is the unit of transactional consistency. The good thing about aggregates is that they streamline your design by grouping related entities into one unit. So let me show you. How will that affect the concept of updating an address? First, there is no such thing as the address. Address belongs to the company. So there is an address ID only for a given company ID. Further on, we load the entire aggregate. Many people say this is wasteful. Why load so many objects? Well, because of the validity of the entire aggregate. It's not just the address. I might change the address, but this address might become incompatible with some other address in the same company. So we must check the entire company before accepting a change to a single address. Do you see it now? This is the core reason why aggregates are good for your design. When all validations pass, we can save the entire aggregate back to the database, but EF Core will make sure that it only sends the updated address back to the database. Everything else remains the same. So this was the general idea. I want to turn the company into an aggregate root. Now, how do I do that? First, there will be no country object, but only the country code, which is the ID of the country. That will affect the method that validates addresses in the company, because there is no country anymore to compare. I will fix the address to make that work. This time it will also just contain the country code. Now I can complete the company validation, compare country codes. They must be equal if two countries are equal. They are the keys. So my validation is complete. I have just turned the company entity into an aggregate. The company class itself is the aggregate root, but when populated together with addresses, it becomes the entire aggregate. Now I want to clean the loading of the company. Look at this. I have this structure in virtually every action method in this controller. First, there's no reason to include the entire country. Also, there's no reason to include countries in the addresses for the same reason. Those were two additional joins in every query. Now I have removed them. There's only one join between the companies and the addresses. And I cannot remove that, obviously. When I fix all other places in this controller, the compile time errors will disappear. And the includes are now simpler, but still repeated in many places. I want to move them somewhere else. I don't want to repeat this every time. If I forget to include addresses somewhere, I would stay without proper validation, you know? So I must avoid that mistake. I want to augment DB context to start working with aggregates, not DB sets. And here's the idea. I will extend the F-core with my custom type that represents a repository for one aggregate type, such as aggregate repository of company. It would be a thin wrapper around the DB set, so it will hide the DB set away. It will let me find a single aggregate by ID. That's what DB set also did, but it didn't include the related entities. It would also let me add and delete the entire aggregate. Update is not needed because DB context is tracking changes already, so you never update anything, you just save changes using EF-core. Adding and deleting is super simple. EF-core DB set does that for us. But finding will be tricky, especially when done in a generic way as I'm trying to do it here. DB set can find an entity, but the includes are missing. This find method will effectively augment EF-core to work with the aggregates. That's the crux of this video. The video actually begins now. I want your full focus from this point on because the next couple of lines of code will change the way how EF-core works. But before that, let me remind you that this channel with all videos on it is free, but only thanks to the sponsors. If you like what you have learned from this video and all other videos on my channel, then please consider joining the growing community of patrons on my Patreon page. As a patron, you will be able to download this entire source code and to examine it at your leisure. Thank you very much for helping me. Now let's focus on this find method, which I want to implement, but I will have some difficulties. I will need an iQueryable to materialize an aggregate. And I will also need the key selector expression, not lambda, not funcDelegate, an expression. Because link for entities works with expressions, not with delegates like link to objects. If you want to augment DB context, DB set, anything, you will need to do some expression arithmetic, like this method here, which is creating a predicate expression to filter by a given ID value. If you have this expression constructed from that key selector, then you can just find an aggregate root by ID, and that aggregate query should guarantee that the entity root now contains all entities and values it controls. the DB set will not be the DB set anymore. It will be an aggregate repository with that DB set of companies again, but it will include the addresses. So I have everything prepared to work with company aggregates, which guarantee to have all the addresses inside of them and proper references to countries both in the company and in every address. This, however, will break all the queries. I need queries completely separate from aggregates. So I will expose the company's DB set as queryable, as no tracking, very important, so that I can query and navigate to other tables wherever needed. Also, there will be the addresses query, because I need to query addresses somewhere. There will be the countries query. I can support all kinds of queries in my application, but aggregates are for updates. Instead of doing all this manually, start from the companies and find the aggregate by ID. When I apply the changes for the entire application, this is what I get. Every company object I work with, every country object, or every other entity in this application will always be an aggregate, which means that it has all the dependent objects inside of it, so that it can check the validity of the entire group of objects that are related before saving to database. That is how aggregates improve your design. And as you could see, augmented EF Core to work with aggregates is actually very simple.